Right now, it sits in your kitchen, next to sugar, next to pepper. You don't think about it, you don't value it, you don't even notice it. But there was a time when this tiny white crystal decided who lived, who starved, and who ruled the world. Not gold, not silver, not diamonds, salt. And the most shocking part? Entire civilizations didn't collapse because of war. They collapsed because of this. Imagine a world where salt is worth more than gold, where soldiers are paid in salt, where governments tax it so heavily that people risk death just to smuggle it, and where losing control of salt means losing control of an empire. Now here's the question. How did something so ordinary become one of the most powerful forces in human history? To understand that, we have to go back to the moment humans first discovered what salt really does. And that discovery changed everything. The invention of survival. Before cities existed, survival was fragile. Food spoiled within hours under heat. Meat rotted quickly. Fish became dangerous in days. There was no storage, no preservation, no safety. Humans lived in a cycle of hunt, eat, and repeat. Then something changed that cycle forever. Salt. Because salt didn't just change food, it changed time. By pulling moisture out of food and slowing bacterial growth, salt allowed food to last days, then weeks, then months. And suddenly, humans had something they never had before. Control over survival. They could store food, travel farther, survive winters, build settlements. But here's the turning point. The moment salt solved survival, it stopped being survival and became power. And power never stays neutral. In ancient China, salt became one of the earliest government monopolies. In Africa, salt was traded across deserts like gold. In Europe, entire towns grew around salt springs. But none of this was the real story. Because once humans understood its value, they didn't just use salt, they fought for it. The first salt economies. Salt production was slow and difficult. In ancient China, workers boiled seawater in clay pots for hours just to extract a small amount of crystals. It was expensive, exhausting, and time-consuming. That scarcity made it powerful. In the Sahara, salt became a desert currency. Massive salt slabs, so heavy they were carried like stone, traveled thousands of kilometers on camel caravans. In some regions, salt was exchanged equal to gold, weight for weight, and suddenly something new emerged in human history. Trade routes built entirely around salt. But trade always leads to control, and control always leads to conflict. Because the moment something becomes essential, someone tries to own it. Entire tribes fought over salt springs. Entire cities rose beside salt mines, and whoever controlled supply controlled survival itself. But one empire understood this better than anyone else. Rome. Rome and the Salt Road. Rome didn't just expand through war. It expanded through systems. And salt was at the center of that system. Roman soldiers needed salted food to survive long campaigns. Without it, the Roman army would have been limited to short distances. So Rome built roads not just for conquest, but for salt transport. One of the most important routes was the Via Salaria, the Salt Road. Salt moved through it constantly. Cities formed around it. Trade depended on it. Even language remembers it. The word salary comes from salarium, payments made to soldiers for salt. Think about that. A soldier's value was once measured in salt. But Rome was only one example, because what came next showed how dangerous salt could become. When governments realize they control something people cannot live without, they don't just tax it, they dominate it. And in one country, that control would ignite chaos. The salt tax that broke France. In pre-revolutionary France, salt was controlled by the state through a brutal tax called the gabelle. Citizens were forced to buy fixed amounts of salt at inflated prices. No choice, no escape, because salt wasn't optional, it was life. And that's what made the system unstable. People needed it daily but couldn't afford it freely. So frustration built quietly. Smuggling increased, resistance spread, and over time pressure built beneath the surface of society, until it finally broke. Historians believe this kind of economic oppression helped fuel the French Revolution, because when survival is controlled, people eventually revolt. But salt wasn't only shaping economies, it was shaping how humans understood life and death. Salt, death, and eternity. In ancient Egypt, salt played a sacred role. Bodies were preserved using natural salt compounds like natron, because decay represented disappearance, and salt represented preservation. To the Egyptians, preserving the body wasn't just physical, it was spiritual. It ensured the soul could continue its journey. Salt, in a sense, became a bridge between life and eternity. But while it preserved the dead, it was also shaping control over the living, because wherever salt production was centralized, power became concentrated, and concentrated power always creates imbalance, and every imbalance in history has one outcome: collapse. When salt became resistance. During British colonial rule in India, salt became a symbol of control. The British government monopolized its production. Even in coastal regions, where salt could be freely collected from seawater, people were forced to buy it from the empire. Something natural became restricted. And that restriction wasn't just economic, it was psychological, because it told people, even survival is not yours. Then came one of the most powerful acts of resistance in history: Mahatma Gandhi's Salt March in 1930. A 240-mile walk to the sea, not for wealth, not for weapons, for salt. And when he picked up salt from the ocean, it wasn't just defiance, it was a message. No empire can own what nature gives freely. That moment didn't just challenge a law, it weakened an empire. But here's what makes this story even more disturbing. Salt once ruled everything. So why doesn't it anymore? The fall of salt power. Because power doesn't disappear, it shifts. Salt lost dominance not because it became useless, but because something else replaced it. Oil replaced energy dependence, technology replaced communication control, data replaced economic influence. Every era has its salt, something essential enough to control civilization. And whoever controls that resource controls the world. Salt didn't build empires alone, and it didn't destroy them alone either. Humans did both. Because every civilization eventually reaches a point where survival depends on something it cannot fully control. And in that moment, power moves away from individuals and into systems, slowly, silently, irreversibly. So the question isn't about salt anymore, it's about today. What is our salt right now? What do we depend on so deeply that we don't even realize it? Because history always repeats one truth. The most powerful forces are never the ones we notice. They are the ones we cannot live without. And everything you cannot live without can be controlled. Salt built trade routes, salt built economies, salt built empires, and salt helped destroy systems that depended too heavily on it. Not because salt changed, but because humanity did. And the next time you see it on your table, remember, you're holding one of the oldest forces of power in human history.